Hey everyone, welcome to this podcast called Ken Reads, where I, Ken, read out your letter that you've shared with me in the hopes that I can better help you understand what the F just happened between you and the last partner you were dating, whether it was in a relationship or a situationship. I look at these experiences from the lens of attachment theory. I don't just come up with thought terminating cliches like, they're just not that into you, or if they wanted to, they would. While some of those phrases might have their benefit in other dynamics, I try and look at this from the lens of, is there perhaps an insecure attachment issue that's at play in these particular dynamics? And though I am an Australian counsellor, I am not someone who is going to be responding to these letters as if I was with a client. I'm here to provide validation, yes, but I can't provide any diagnoses on these. So even if, a lot of people might understandably hear this and be like, well, that sounds like a narcissist. At best, I'll probably say, sounds a bit narky. I probably won't go any further than that out of respect to my ethical boundaries in regards to what I can and can't do. If you find this of benefit to you, fantastic. That's what I want. And if you want to submit your letter, you're very welcome to, once there is obviously availability per month. And I'll happily read out and share my own 2 cents as to what I think has gone on in your dating experience to offer you a sense of validation for what you've been through, and also to give other people listening a chance to feel like maybe this relates to what they've also experienced as part of collective healing. So with that all out of the way, let's dive in to the latest letter. Tonight, we have not one, but two letter readings. So brace yourself because tonight is the double feature Ken Reads show. So we start off with Cindy's letter. Cindy writes, "Hi Ken, this letter is going to have a little different flavor than all that I've heard on your page, and I've listened to them all. I'll be an example of how much growth can happen when we are willing to stop chasing after what continues to elude us and stop running from ourselves and ultimately what we are seeking, which is to be seen, accepted, and loved." I wanted to start off here by saying it's, you know, firstly, I'm super excited to read this because obviously we're starting off with a very different theme here. I understand the letter may detail themes that we are very familiar with, but the thing is that most people who write these letters are often doing so when they're probably in that stage one stage of the breakup period. And stage one I classify as being you've just had a bad, abrupt breakup with an avoidant partner, and the breakup may be one of many. And you're looking for clarity over your situation because you're like, what the F just happened? It seems like for Cindy, she's moved into more stage two, stage three of how did I get here? And how do I start really engaging with those self-love practices which are essential for healing? So, with that being said, why don't we continue? Because this letter's off to a great start. I'm super excited for this and also super keen to validate Cindy's growth as well. All right. I think it's important to say that when I started this process, I had never even heard of attachment theory, nor was I aware of what my internal landscape looked like. I have come to realize that I've pursued healing most of my life, looking for answers and trying to fix myself, but had no idea I was approaching it all from a spiritually bypassing place of intellectualizing. That's really interesting. So there's obviously two key things there, the spiritual bypassing and the intellectualizing. So I think to me, what really stands out here is that it sounds like the intellectualizing piece went into overdrive using a lot of spiritual concepts to try and make sense of what was going on, but didn't connect deeper into the more subconscious stuff that was going on. So already we've got someone who at the very least has a good understanding of what likely is happening and some of the language that might associate with that, but it didn't sort of address those core issues. So a little backstory on me. I grew up in HI. I don't know what that stands for, but anyways, HI, a home with two parents that As it turns out, neither were they biological, and a home that consisted of an angry, narcissistic father and a cluster B neurodivergent stepmom that really didn't like children. As a little person, I begged for attention from parents that fluctuated either in a constant state of stress or had questionable friends over doing drugs and drinking to all hours into the night with music that could be heard for miles. Neither of my parents' emotional ages could have been more than 12 or 13, and volatility was the norm, which cued my nervous system that almost never felt safe at home and had never been emotionally attuned to. So I was constantly looking for people to co regulate my nervous system with to feel safe, and I had a hard time being alone. I just want to take a moment here to say, Cindy, I am so sorry you've been through this because there's already a lot of awful stuff going on. Where if you were doing your ACEs, your adverse childhood experiences, you'd be ticking a lot of boxes. So, firstly, I'm sorry that you came from a home where, again, I don't understand what the HI stands for, but there's enough in here for me to intuit that you've come from a very volatile and emotionally abusive home. Having at least one parent who is narcissistic is bad enough on a child's development, but having a second who is not even interested in having kids, when we have two parents who don't do a good enough job of being able to be attuned to their kids and also their emotional needs, welcome to insecure attachment land and a whole bunch of other things that go on for people as well too, which is just horrific. And I think for Cindy, it's clear that, there's a real disconnection from self. There's obviously been a subconscious need to try and find safety, connection, closeness that was never met during childhood through obviously adult folk. I wouldn't be surprised if, in the teenage years, there was a bit of that as well too. If you've had a household where volatility is the norm and you've had parents where there's drug dealing, there's no boundaries, as you just said beautifully, their emotional age couldn't have been higher than 12 or 13. We're already dealing with a clusterfuck situation. This is a trauma cocktail waiting to happen for a child. Generational trauma is happening right here. So yeah, that's terrible. And I think also, when you are trying to, I can see also why the intellectualizing piece would have come in because it's survival, right? You're looking to make sense of things that just don't make sense. And I think spiritual bypassing, yes, it gets a bad rap, but in a way that can also be fantasy. It can also be a way of helping us to escape the uncomfortable situation that we're in by trying to disassociate and also to help us to not have to deal with the reality of how painful, and a childhood experience can be. So we've got a lot of stuff here. And I think this is also really crucial for helping us understand what will likely be indicators of potential attachment stuff going down the line. All right, let's continue. I had a few longer term boyfriends in my 20s, see, of a couple years each, and then met my ex, and we're going to call him Dan. And it was a whirlwind romance. There was a big age gap, and he was younger than I, but perhaps the same emotional age. I had just had more life experience and I had a lot of enthusiasm, but I'm going to call it a dysregulated nervous system. I take a pause here and just say, I love enthusiasm, and I think a lot of us have a lot of enthusiasm. But one thing I find with enthusiasm for a lot of us, I speak for myself, is that it is often at times when it comes to relationships, something that we can get very ahead of ourselves. We can get very excited and feel euphoric when we connect with people, even as friends or people that we bond with. And I think it's very easy for us to trip ourselves up at times and to not see things from a grounded place. I'm not saying enthusiasm is bad, but if you work on your enthusiasm and you start to unpack it, you often realize that just because you're excited about something doesn't mean it's good for you. Just because you're excited about something doesn't mean it's absolutely, a good thing at all times. And you have every right to feel enthusiastic about certain things, but I think sometimes we underestimate how some of these big emotions can be misleading and not always accurate in certain contexts. So just because someone's excited for dinner does not necessarily mean that the content of the plate is necessarily good for you as well too. So just putting it out there and saying that. That's very specific contextually, so please don't read into that too much if that's something that doesn't apply to you. Anyways, I relate because I can get very enthusiastic and it has caused me a lot of problems in relationships too, so I get it. The love bombing started right away, and it was probably some of the most extreme, with flowers, diamond, tennis, bracelets, and lavish dates and gifts often. Can I tell you, that would be just crack for a dysregulated nervous system. You'd feel like, oh my God, I'm getting everything I never had. So that's quite impactful for a nervous system. Dan wrote me love letters daily and talked often of forever, and all he quote unquote hoped he could be for me as I was quote unquote the girl he'd always dreamed of but thought he would never find. So already we've got another person. I guessed that Cindy was experiencing fantasizing, but with Dan, we can see that this is a man who has a lot of fantasy thinking in his. And it also suggests to me that his way of relating to people is with big demonstrative gestures of love, right? Like the diamond tennis bracelets, the lavish dates, the gifts. This is a man who really, likes to come on hard and heavy. And it might just be an indicator of also what he thinks love is based on how he grew up. I would not be surprised if it was all about the acts of service, the gift giving, not the emotional connection piece. I almost one day want to review the five love languages and almost go back into it being like, how much of these are actually signs of developmental trauma? Meaning, how much of this is actually what we think love is based on what we grew up, but isn't actually that deeper layer of love, which is connection? I think quality time gets close, but it's not quite what that real connection is, which is presence and, vulnerability and understanding one another. Like, it's not to say any of that stuff doesn't feel good because it absolutely can, but I think it's such, and I mean, is it any surprise that the author of that book, writes in a way that, with all due respect, can come across as a bit shallow. Those five love languages, I think were a useful guide to sort of help us create verbiage around how do I like to be treated, similar to like how do I like to be, how do I like to play in bed. But I think the danger of it is that it almost simplified love to these demonstrations which are lovely, but aren't really the full extent of what love can be, and in my opinion, should be if we're looking for some healthy co-regulation. If you like this stuff, by all means, throw it in. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think we too often look at this stuff as like, that's love. And it's like, no, just because it feels good to you doesn't mean that it's that extra layer of connection through deeper emotional intimacy. So that's maybe a conversation for another day, but let's keep going. All right. I thought I had met my Prince Charming, the one who could make me finally feel safe and would take care of me. We married after a year and 5 months after breaking up a couple of times. One time was my fault for a stunt I pulled from avoidance sabotage and against the wishes of his family. They all felt he needed to go out and become established and get his degree, but he was driven and knew what he wanted as an entrepreneur and wanted to get on with his life, and he knew that included me, the woman of his dreams, which was a dopamine high and the relationship idealization. Also hadn't had a chance to wear off, but coming from the purity culture, he had some things he thought he had coming to him. With this contract we were about, sorry, let me start that sentence again. Um, he knew that he wanted me, the woman of his dreams, bracket. This was a dopamine high, and the relationship idealization hadn't had a chance to wear off. But coming from the purity culture he had had, some things he thought he had coming to him with this contract we were also about to sign, and that he'd learned through the world of pornography, he hadn't decided to let me in on. Oh, okay. So from this, it makes me sound like he might have a underlying pornography issue. It could be a full-blown addiction, but it sounds to me as though he has a very unrealistic view of what love and relationships is. So interesting. And interesting that you admit to an avoidance sabotage moment as well, too. So that suggests to me that there is some avoidance C playing out for you as well, too, Cindy. So fair enough and good self-disclosure. I have to admit, I knew it was rushing and I panicked. I had doubts and was flooded with fear, and my body was telling me it wasn't right, but I went ahead talking to myself into it with logic. Let's take a moment to pause here. I learned this the hard way. and I wanted to say this because it's so important to share with people who are trauma survivors. There is such a danger in assuming that when the body is speaking to us, it somehow bequeaths us with wisdom that is always accurate. It's true we have intuition, and that's its own thing, which is really important. However, sometimes our body sends us signals and cues, which are impulses, urges, and big and emotional rushes, which aren't actually based on helpful experiences in the moment. And that's why I have to agree with Anna Runkle from the Crappy Childhood Fairy, where she did this video being like, you got to be very careful not to necessarily trust your body and feel your emotions if you're a trauma survivor. I think she said it in a bit of a way that was a little bit draconian, if you ask me. I think some nuance and discernment needed to be added in the video that she did. But what I would summarize this into is, as trauma survivors, fuck me dead. It is so it is so insidious how sometimes our bodies can be telling us things like Cindy's experiencing, like, this isn't right, which is a very real avoidant thing to experience, but it doesn't mean that this partner isn't right for you. It's usually just a panic moment that can often happen, and it can be very much felt in usually our gut regions of our body. I have never felt that urge, but I know what happens for a lot of my clients who do. So I get it. But yeah, it's very much a scary thing to experience. And I'm going to do videos comparing a lot of this stuff to binge eating in the future, but it's very similar to those sort of symptoms that we see in binge eating survivors as well too. Anyways, let's keep going. In his eyes, in Dan's eyes, I was to meet his sexual needs, take care of the children, and he would provide the finances. Okay, so very patriarchal, very typical sort of, view of how things go in relationships. We were married for 19 years, and even after 5 children, we were never able to truly connect, and I never fully gave my heart to him. Ooh, interesting. During our marriage, we could have filled our avoidant bingo cards to black out many times over and after him leaving for his mistress after the last affair. Wow, I should have brought my bingo cards. Um, okay. So during our marriage, we would have filled out avoidant bingo cards to black out many times over. And after him leaving for his mistress after the last affair, I finally felt relief. Is that something a dismissive avoidant might say? Yes. But it's also something someone that never felt safe after so many times sharing my heart, only to be misunderstood, says. Okay, so that's really interesting. So it says to me that, you know, um, it sounds to me like this is coming from a place of burnout as well too. Like it sounds to me like this is coming from a place of exhaustion for you, Cindy. It sounds like you got to a point where both of you, even though you're filling out your respective avoidant bingo cards, probably got to a point where for you, Cindy, you were just over it by that point. And it sounds to me like after so many attempts to try and feel safe, you were just like, fuck it, I'm done. Relief, I think sometimes, again, going back to my point about emotions earlier, sometimes we will feel relieved about certain situations that are truly bad for us, where there's like a lot of, like when we experience a lot of stress, right? And stress responses in the body can happen for a variety of reasons. Because we're in a bad, toxic work environment, a toxic relationship, or sometimes our body is having inner conflict because we're scared that we're with someone who's better than us and we're freaking the hell out. And we naturally feel relief when we walk away from them. But is that relief denoting that the relationship was wrong or that we're now just feeling less anxiety? This is where context and nuance becomes so important because we often think relief is the universal sign that everything is hunky-dory. It's like, no, 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 no. In some contexts, absolutely. And with time, you'll be able to determine whether or not you made a good decision. But usually that relief is more in response to the stress response depleting itself and being like, thank God we're done. However, with time, we can look back on these experiences with discernment to see what was really going on. That relief is a short-term soothing for many of us in these contexts. So for an avoidant attacher, I could look at this and say, maybe it is a little bit of that partial relief from being in the freeze and coming back down into more of a, that healthy sympathetic state of, the fight response kicking in, as well as also just relief from, being like, I'm done. I'm done. I don't want to deal with this shit anymore. I'm burnt out and I'm exhausted. So it could be a bit of that as well too. Anyways, I had decided I would not date or be on any dating apps, but was on social media and had been for nearly 20 years. I had no idea what the dating cultural climate had turned into, as I'd been out of it for over 23 years and wasn't looking for a relationship and just wanted to heal after the ending of my marriage from my ex that showed no remorse or compassion. It was so bizarre how he could end our 20-year marriage and then offer me a friend zone card and be serious about it with no external remorse to the damage caused to myself and our children. I now know this to be an avoidant discard. You are absolutely right. But I am sorry that you went through that, Cindy. I know you're probably not going into great detail with this because I have a funny feeling there's more to come. But I would do want to say I am sorry that you went through that experience with your ex-husband, Dan, because it sounds like the way you described him, it sounds to me like he's very young emotionally, and he just didn't have the bandwidth, the capacity to really see or hear or validate you for where you were at. And I think that it is a failing on his part that he hasn't matured and grown. Is it his fault for developing like this? No. But is it his responsibility to work on himself? Yes. I mean, if you are also someone who leans avoidant, it sounds to me like you're on a mission to better yourself and your character. So, as we all are, hopefully. I'm saying that across the attachment spectrum for all of us CPTSD survivors and warriors and thrivers. That, for him, it sounds like he's missing the assignment. He's not really doing his job. Great. So yeah, I am, and also take a moment here to say I'm sorry for your kids too, because the damage that can be done through an avoidant discard is traumatic to the children as well too. Anyways, let's continue. So you've done all of this self-care, reparations on yourself. You've been out of the dating game for 23 years. Or, sorry, I should say you've been out of it for 23 years, but you've slowly sort of gotten into things again from the sounds of it. So, and that's mostly because of the marriage the time you spent in your marriage as well, too. So obviously a lot's happened there. And you're also coming to terms with understanding what an avoidant discard is, although I presume the language for that came later. But anyways, this leads me to how I met the guy that caused me to fall off the cliff into the most painful awakening I could have gone through. I saw this guy with bright blue eyes, suggested as a friend, and unlike myself, I clicked his profile picture and I read through some of his posts on what I now know as a carefully curated page that painted a picture of a loving father that was aimed at garnering attention and external validation from a bevy of desperate women. Oh, wow, that says a lot about this guy right here. I laughed at one of his posts, not realizing I was adding myself to the roster. The roster. Okay, so this guy, I'm assuming this guy has a problem where he's not very good with regards to his boundaries towards women, especially when he's in a relationship. So this is already saying a lot. I love that you're using the word roster. And he friend requested me within 15 minutes. And it couldn't have been more than half an hour later. And we were chatting in DMs. And yes, it was him initiating. I have to be honest right now. I'm cringing looking back at the speed and dopamine dumping and how blinding I was. I had literally, oh, sorry, and how blinded I was. I literally had no idea and no understanding to what hellish nightmare was beginning, other than thinking it felt like a dream come true. Do you know what I love about the way you're writing this, Cindy, is you're well and truly past stage one, where I feel like, yeah, there might be layers of shock that you're still dealing with, a pocket of irritation and frustration here and there. But I can really see that you're looking back at this going from a place of like, what the fuck did I get myself into? You describe that as a hellish nightmare whilst also simultaneously describing how it felt like a dream come true. Isn't that the paradox of these relationships? I love this space so much because it really is a demonstration of two things can be true at so many times. It can be the start of a beautiful nightmare, as Beyonce would say. I think that's what she says. I haven't actually listened to that song. But it is that whole thing of where it can be also, a terrible dream where it's like, how can two of these things coexist at once? And that's hard for a lot of trauma survivors because we often have a lot of black and white thinking and we often go, did they care? Did they love us, etc.? But that's neither here nor there for now. Let's continue. Uh, Dwight, the new guy, was very engaging and had a lot of questions and talked right away about his divorce that had been final 7 or 8 months previously. But he'd also stated that she had been away for half the year prior to that. So it wasn't sudden and had been coming for at least 5 years. Okay, wow. I was quite attracted to Dwight, and we were both so quote unquote excited to meet someone that seemed to share so many common interests, similar life paths, and strong attraction to one another. And boy, I thought I was ready, but buckle up, it's going to be a ride. I'm here for it. I've been doing years of introspecting and owning my part in the failing and the falling apart of my marriage to Dan. But I didn't realize all the ways I'd been minimizing my severe childhood trauma and highly developed coping strategies. We all do that, so I respect that. But not to minimize you doing that, I just want to say the iceberg is often way bigger than we think it is. So yes, I relate to that is what I'm trying to say. Many of which were maladaptive coping strategies, but hypervigilance always seemed to be one step ahead until it wasn't. There was nothing slow on my part, and out of the gate, I was sharing what I wanted in a connection, which included honesty and vulnerability, and I was asking lots of probing questions that a secure person would ask, and I shared with transparency. The problem was I was rushing, and in my haste, I was not deeply listening to his responses and checking with my body to see how it felt with his vague answers, which I just chalked up to being shy or having less words like many men do. Be very, 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 and this isn't to you, Cindy, explicitly, but just to everyone in general. We've got to get away from this whole thinking of like men do this, men do that. Yes, sometimes men have very stereotypical things they do. They pee from a penis. We know that. But when it comes to this, in this context, I think we've got to be very careful of the stories we tell ourselves about men and their shyness, because often we intellectualize what's going on without actually connecting with what am I sensing here in the connection that's been established with this person? Does it feel like there's a bit of resistance from the other person? Because if it does, it suggests the other person might have a bit of internal conflict, in which case, in my opinion, abort that ship before it starts to launch, because you might be the next SS Titanic. Anyways, when I shared what I was looking for, I somehow missed the response of, uh-oh, to me telling him what I was looking for. And it wasn't after it all unraveled that I went back to when I went back to comb over the rubble, looking for clues as to what the hell just happened. I found it all there in black and white with everything plain as day staring me in the face. Isn't that how it is for a lot of us? Like, I think genuinely, yes, there are times where we can't see the red flags. I will give us all of that too. However, I will be honest when I can say I can look back at those early text messages of avoidant exes and be like, oh yeah, there it is. It's right there. My basic questions were never answered clearly, or if they were, there was maybe some resistance to getting an answer and things were vague. Anyways, my relationship with Dwight was more of a situationship at best because he certainly was never fully invested. He seemed to stand on his side of the wall, peeking over from the start, but as time went by, he built the damn wall even higher with a slow fade into oblivion. The things he did were textbook avoidant, but what I never figured out is whether they were dismissive or fearful leaning with a heavy let me start that again. I couldn't figure out if he was dismissive avoidant or dismissive leaning fearful avoidant. There were also other signs that strongly suggested some possible cluster B issues. Where is that avoidant bingo card? Because it was a blackout. I'm going to have to print that out. It was so funny. We lived 2 states away, which he said actually made him feel relieved because relationships scared the hell out of him, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for a relationship. But if he did, he wanted to take it at a garden snail's pace. He said he was confused about how he felt about life and who he was, stating he didn't feel like he was good at anything. He didn't feel like he was good at anything, as he figured effort was all he had. His ex had gone back to her country as soon as the divorce was final, leaving him to raise his daughters, which in his hyper independence, he said he had been doing for years prior to that. I feel like in the beginning he showed so much interest, but it fizzled because it wasn't really his baseline. It was only fueled by the dopamine and idealization of me and what the perfect version of this fantasy he'd created in his mind could be. And he'd also told me he was a perfectionist and could only relax if things in his environment were perfect. A dangerous thing, perfectionism. That'll be a conversation for another day. I, on the other hand, was showing up daily with transparency and love, knowing there was a huge chance this dream could come true, was probably being built on sand and fantasy of what could be rather than the reality that this guy was, as he said, shy, insecure, and I edited himself, often ruining the timing for comedy. I think for me, what was really happening was I could truly see him and how hard he was working, but he was focused on all his mistakes and hopelessness ending with his nightly routine of being so excited to get home to his 2 glasses of wine and movie. He spoke of being socially awkward even with his friends and spending multiple 5-hour days at the gym being his only social outlet, although he didn't socialize there. He only liked to eavesdrop on conversations and said I'd expected more of him if I knew how much time he really spent working on his physique. He made a lot of derogatory remarks about his ex-wife, and when I asked if he had looked at why he chose someone like that, he said, "I'm not sure I'm ready to look at that yet." Somehow I didn't see that as the red flag it really was. That is a glaring red flag. Um, Particularly because okay, on one hand, some of us might be unwilling to look at why we were in a relationship with an ex. That is fine in certain contexts. Ideally, when we're in therapy and we're still mad and angry at our ex for the way they behaved. That question is a little bit too heavy-handed at times for some people. However, he is, what, 8 months out of his divorce. And also, he should have had plenty of time to think about this stuff by now. So it suggests to me he's not looking at this from a place of, it suggests to me he's still not at the point where he should be to be committed. It suggests to me that he still has baggage for his ex, in this case, frustration and anger. And it suggests to me that there's, I think a problem here where we've got some workaholism, gym addiction sort of stuff. I feel like there's definitely dismissive flavors here for sure. I'm going to say it's feeling like it could be more dismissive avoidant. And I say this because I feel like this man's walls are impenetrable. I feel like even though he's described himself as shy and insecure, I feel like the way he's describing that is almost like it's a quirky thing to call oneself shy and insecure. Like, I'm just delicate. Like, that's what all the girls love to hear because then they open up to you and they become excited. Like, to me, I feel like it's less of a, yeah, I'm actually insecure and shy. Like, sometimes I find that dismissive leaning fearfuls will wear that on their sleeves and, really belabor that point. Whereas I feel with Dwight, I feel like the way it's written here, correct me if I'm wrong, Cindy, but it seems more like it's sort of like a badge of honor. I'm insecure and shy. I'm a little bit quirky. I like to go to the gyms for 5 hours to socialize. I like to work stupidly long hours and come home for my 2.5 hours of wine and TV. Like, this is a man who I feel is very easily distracted and throws himself into distractions. Whereas I feel like a fearful avoidant, yeah, they can do that, but I feel like it would be more intense, sort of hot and cold, addictive sort of stuff going on. So to me, I actually would say Dan was probably the dismissive leaning fearful avoidant, whereas Dwight seems more dismissive avoidant, in my opinion. But I mean, this is based on what I've read so far, and there could be a whole lot more to the story that's not here. So, anyways, and you're only in a situationship, right? So it sounds like I feel like he's very guarded. He's really not letting you in at all. He's really just peeking from an ever-growing wall to sort of view you, but not really connect with you. So, anyways, let's continue. I can look back at dozens of things he said that are flashing signs right now and absolutely comments from any future person I would not ignore. After 2 weeks of chatting, I flew up to see him as he was living in my hometown, and I needed to know if this was what I thought it was. When I thought this was love, it was actually dopamine and cortisol. I couldn't at the time distinguish between attraction and anxiety, and as it turns out, it was anxiety, and my body was screaming to run. Mm. That's very interesting you sharing that because again, it kind of goes back to what I was saying before about bodily cues and how a lot of our bodily cues are very hard to read and understand sometimes, and maybe misfiring as well too. A scary thought, isn't it? For a lot of us to think that our body may at times be misleading us. It's not to say that the body, I know I've said before, like, oh, that the body doesn't lie and all this sort of other stuff. And yes, it doesn't in some contexts, but I think we've got to be very careful discerning what's trauma, what's the body sending us useful cues and signals, what's intuition, a lifelong journey of discovery. It's not, I learn as time goes on that it's not clear cut as I would like it to be. It's tough. But anyways, This was the first time in my life I'd fully opened my heart to someone that within the first 10 days we had referred to each other as Romeo and Juliet, and I thought I was living out a fairy tale romance. Let me just say that without the depth of connection, I allowed myself to open. Let me just say that without this depth of connection, I allowed myself to open to, I would never have been able to make myself fully. This man somehow held the keys to lead me home to myself. He was the catalyst to the healing of my inner little girl I had abandoned so many years ago. What I had mistaken was the lesson being the relationship I was to hold on to, but it was the next year and a half that I used the lens of the whirlwind relationship to understand my attachment wounding and how all the relationships in my life have played out, even the ones with my children. Wow. Wow, that's powerful. That's really powerful stuff. And I mean, I can relate to a lot of that stuff in my own journey as well too. But man, aren't these relationships such big mirrors to ourselves? I know a lot of people may not be able to resonate with that yet for understandable reasons, but oh man, when you get to that perspective, it's just like shit. Like it's just slaps you in the face and makes you realize so much stuff. Healing takes time, and it comes from the willingness to sit with the pain and the truth of what was and what is without trying to change it. It also requires looking at our part and grieving those we have harmed, regardless of if that was our intention or not, of whether or not we had impact on others. And until we're ready and willing to look at the part we played and ask the painful questions of why and where those coping behaviors come from, we cannot feel true compassion and empathy for another. I completely agree with everything you just said. I love what you said. It is very true. And I will say this from myself and with work that I've done with clients. When we meet the most unsavory aspects of ourselves and sit with some of the most painful things that are inside of us, we can then open up to so much compassion for people that are out there. Now, obviously, in the context of these letter readings, I'm defending the letter writer within reason, of course, and offering constructive feedback where it's appropriate. I'd say all of you have gone through some horrendous experiences with people who have treated you badly. And so often that validation serves a purpose to support you in your growth and healing. And occasionally I might throw in a bit of compassion and empathy for the avoidant partner here and there, if it's appropriate, of course. But I want to make it very clear that whilst validation for your pain and hurt at the hands of someone who's been abusive is important, there comes a point in our healing journey where when we start to unlearn and also meet some of the parts of ourselves that can be kind of shitty to other people as well, and also the way in which we show up in ways that are unsavory, is when we can go, "Oh, okay, I can see why my ex may have done that, and I can have a bit of pity, I can have compassion. It doesn't erase the anger, it doesn't erase a lot of the frustration. You are not expected to forgive this person for what they did, but it can give you a more well-rounded perspective of people at large and just show how complicated and messy and amazing people are as well too. So yes, I think it's one of the most healing things to do is to meet ourselves off the back of this, but that's a stage unto itself. Very much stage 3 stuff we're talking about. I was most definitely a fearful avoidant, and I think my healing only truly began from the pain of the loss I could no longer run from. Yep, yep. To know thyself deeply requires deep humility, and most of us get good at finding ways to bypass that pain, but it only prolongs our healing and almost certainly guarantees more pain. Yes. So, an example of this, and I'm okay if it happens within reason, is a lot of people get into these angry stages where they're just constantly blaming their avoidant ex for everything. A phase of that is appropriate. Now, some people's phase might last years and unto each their own. However, the danger of getting stuck and also becoming addicted to our emotions in this phase, for example, is that we lose sight of the bigger picture of things. Your avoidant ex, in most cases, is not all bad. They have a side of them that can be abusive, but this person was also capable of loving you at one point. How do you reconcile that dissonance? How do you find the middle ground between those seemingly dissonant, you know, parts, right? A subject which I've talked about before. But the point simply is to say is that, it's very easy for a lot of us to just hold on to the pain of the past without actually taking a moment to be like, how did I get here? Why am I holding on to this? And what is it serving me? And that's hard stuff to ask. And that's only just the beginning. Like then there comes all the deep radical introspection that happens off the back of it, the tears that were never cried that come out of that off, from our childhood. Like every tear that was unwept as a child that has to be then, you know, wept. And for us to properly grieve a lot of things that have not been grieved properly, takes time. I'm not personally a big tearer, but the point is that, there's a lot of emotional processing that must occur. So it's full on. Anyways, the real story of those weeks of exchanges between Dwight and I that turned into months are only salacious morsels pebbling back to the truth of what unhealed trauma does to us. I will continue to seek healing and be patient and kind with myself, knowing that I'm actually a living miracle of someone being able to survive unspeakable abuse and trauma and be able to still connect to my heart and find forgiveness of others and learn how to set boundaries that honor my own heart and core values. I know I won't escape the potential of future triggers and pain, but I can say that I won't abandon myself again and that I will speak up and slow down to hear the words being spoken and honor to my body's clues. Because she is wise and she leads me away from what isn't meant for me. It just took me over 50 years to stop rushing towards the finish line and slow down enough to hear. Thank you, Ken, for showing up on this platform because it was an integral part of my awakening and to all that I wasn't seeing in light of all I thought I was. I appreciate you. Cindy, thank you very much for your beautiful words. I really appreciate it. And I truly resonate with a lot of what you've said because I am still a work in progress and learning from very much the same things that you are learning too. I love this letter reading. So different. Yes, there's obviously a tale of Dan and Dwight as old as time. We've heard these tales before, but what a wonderful angle to look at this because no shame to anyone who's written before or who will go on to write after this. What I love about what Cindy has demonstrated is how character and also the willingness and readiness to work on oneself can happen for people across the attachment spectrum. Yes, there are people who are severely avoidant who are likely not going to change because of their own resistances to change. However, if people can learn to embrace loss and find the deeper, I suppose, resolution off the back of that and be able to grow from it, you can heal so much arrested development, trauma, have the gateway to really honor and work on yourself, in many ways, become your own therapist. And what I love about this is you can really see that Cindy is taking an active look at how did I get here? This is not about victim blaming. It is not about saying Cindy deserved the pain from Dwight and Dan. No, she didn't deserve what they did to her. It's more about looking back and going, how did I get to this position? Because it wasn't purely fate. Yeah, it may have been a bit of bad luck that you ran into two of these people who are highly avoidant. But when you start to take a look at the bigger picture, it becomes very clear. It's like, oh, yeah, I can see how one could have gotten to this place. I actually think this is a really important story for people to hear because it actually gives people a sense of control and power that it's like we're not going to be helpless to these experiences, that we can actually overcome them. And look, a lot of people will, potentially find a new romantic partner off the back of the Dans and the Dwights, and they may be healthier for them. Amazing. However, I personally think, controversially, that a lot of this healing can only be done obviously with a therapist or by oneself within reason. Of course, there are some things you need a therapist for. I don't think you can actually do this stuff in a new relationship. I really don't. Like some of these triggers might come up, but I think it's much harder to do them. Like I think it's much harder to sort of sit and look at yourself when you're in a relationship because so much of that time and energy goes into the relationship that you don't really have the same time to sort of reflect and go, whoa, 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 wait a minute, what's going on here for me? Granted, sometimes it can occur. I've got some clients who are navigating some particularly interesting cases where they are navigating themselves in a relationship, but that's usually because the relationship's not working. So, we've got to be careful that our baggage can sometimes follow us into seemingly good relationships. And I think, it's harder to sit with that and work on it efficiently if we're with someone new. Doesn't mean you can't, but it's just harder. I mean, if the relationship's going well, I mean, what incentive do you have to work on it? It's like, it's going great. I'm feeling good. Last thing I want to address, the self-compassion piece. Sorely underestimated. but very important because just like binge eating recovery, which I'm going to talk a lot about, which I know might seem like it has nothing to do with this, but it actually does, is shame needs compassion and love to heal. And a lot of us have not got kind inner voices, which is why I often talk about our inner critics. And if we don't have a system that knows how to be kind and gentle with us, well, just like Dwight, I think it was Dwight, who upholds himself on perfectionism. Perfectionism within reason, fine. Everyone can be a bit of an achiever, that's fine. But often I find perfectionism is rooted in childhood trauma, where we try and be so hard on ourselves, so belligerent and strict to be something that we're not in order to please other people, that we lose sight of ourselves and also can't connect with us in a healthy way. We become essentially like a toxic workplace to ourselves. And what do? We burn out as a consequence. So, yes, not fun, not cool, not great. Anyways, I just want to say, Cindy, thank you for sharing this. What a unique letter. I really appreciate this. And I'm literally going to be back in 5 minutes to do the next letter reading. But what a great letter for self-reflection. And I'm sure many people who listen to this who are at a similar stage to you will really relate and resonate with what you've shared. So thank you.